Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining Taproot's webinar today, Developing More Resilient Organizations Through Pro Bono. We're so glad that folks could take the time to join us. Please continue introducing yourself and your organization here in the chat. We're really looking forward to getting to know you and maybe which state or city you're joining us from and the work you're doing in your community. So before I dive in, I just want to acknowledge a simple truth. The past few months have tested us. Yet, really, through it all, nonprofits like the ones on the line today have really risen to meet the challenge, leading, rebuilding, and recovery efforts for communities around the globe. From providing healthcare to increasing access to education to fighting for racial equity, the work of social good organizations really has truly never been more critical. But despite being called on to address these ever growing community needs, nonprofits are facing shifts in traditional funding and seeing decreased access to in person volunteer support. And that's really why we're here today, because it's so important that you all feel empowered and ready to rise up and meet these community needs now and in the months ahead. So, again, we so appreciate you taking the time to join us, especially during such a busy period. And we're looking forward to digging in with you all during today's event and the weeks ahead. So before I continue, I just want to get a quick confirmation from folks in the chat that audio is coming through loud and clear. I don't want to be talking to empty space right now, so I'll wait. All right. I see Susan, Crystal. Great. Thanks so much for joining and confirming that all. So, we're especially glad to be coming together with you all during Pro Bono Week, which is an annual celebration of the impact of pro bono service on communities around the globe. And I do want to give a huge thank you to our Pro Bono Week 2020 sponsor and longtime pro bono supporter, American Express, for making free community events like this one possible. And just to introduce myself, so I'm not just a random talking voice. My name is Kimberly Swartz, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Taproot. I have the really great job of getting to introduce nonprofit and business professionals to Taproot's programs and creating resources, blogs, or community events like this one to help make great business pro bono possible. So I'm joined today by my Taproot colleague, Hannah Vona, who's going to be covering the chat box during today's presentation. All attendees will be muted throughout today's event, but please use that chat box to introduce yourself, network, ask questions, or make comments throughout the event. Hannah will be handling some questions throughout, or will boost them out to me, and we will have some Q&A time later in the event at the end of the webinar. So a little bit more about what we do here at Taproot. The Taproot Foundation drives social change by leading, mobilizing, and engaging professionals in pro bono service. Since the early 2000s, Taproot has partnered with over 8,000 social change organizations and 22,000 volunteers, totaling $205 million in donated professional services. In addition to our pro bono programs and CSR consultancy work, we're also leaders of a global pro bono network and are committed to advancing the pro bono movement through further research, education, and events. So during today's event specifically, we'll be covering insights from Taproot's 2020 nonprofit resiliency survey, and really digging into this question of what's the value in using pro bono support at nonprofit organizations. I'll also be digging into examples of pro bono projects that can actually assist nonprofits in building key capacity in areas that will lead to preparedness and resiliency in times of strength and crisis. And then a little later in today's event, we're actually going to have a conversation with a nonprofit leader, someone who's featured in our newest nonprofit resource, Building Resiliency Through Pro Bono, and who is a really experienced pro bono user themselves. So a little bit more about that nonprofit leader later in the presentation. And then I'll really briefly touch on how you can connect with this virtual pro bono support through Taproot. And then, like I said, we are going to try and save some time at the very end for some question and answer. So it's a jam-packed schedule. So I'm gonna just dive right in here. And I just want to share a tiny bit more about Taproot, just in case you're joining one of our events for the very first time. So we were founded in 2001, like I mentioned, really with this knowledge that there's a massive resource gap present in the social sector, right? So we have these organizations who may very well have the solutions to our world's most pressing social challenges, but they simply don't have the financial means, um, budget, expertise on staff to carry out their missions to their fullest extent. So, to put it simply, most organizations tackling these social problems don't have what they need to fully accomplish their vital missions. The lack of ability to really invest in ourselves as nonprofits saps our ability to build strong, resilient, and sustainable organizations for the long term. And due to the current global crises, charitable organizations are really feeling this strain more than ever. And that's really where pro bono can help. So, Taproot Foundation bridges this nonprofit resource gap through connections with skilled volunteers who provide their tech, marketing, HR, strategy, or finance experience pro bono. So, I really want to quickly pause there for a moment because often when we mention pro bono, the first place that people's minds go is legal, but it really is so much more than that. So, pro bono is donated professional services benefiting organizations who are working to improve society. So, in the business community, this can typically refer to things like marketing, strategic planning, or financial management, but it really could be any professional services from plumbing to architecture. So, Taproot's programs specifically focus on the areas of marketing, HR, tech, finance, data operations, and strategy. And that's really the fields that I'll be focusing the presentation on today. So, through a study we completed with CEP originally in 2015, but using refreshed data in 2019, Taproot actually determined that the average value of an hour of pro bono service to be around $195. So, since our average pro bono project takes around 30 hours of volunteer time to complete, it means that your nonprofit is looking at donated services amounting to just under $6,000 per pro bono project you request. So, throughout the webinar today, when we say that pro bono is a valuable tool, we really, really mean it. So, by infusing use of pro bono support throughout your departments, you really can save money on your bottom line while building capacity and longer term stability. And on the subject of saving on your bottom line, for nonprofits, we know that your bottom line is your mission and the community members that you're serving. And this year, nonprofits are having to operate more leanly than ever, meeting rising community needs while dealing with decreased access to hands on volunteer support, canceled fundraising events, and more. So, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Taproot was in an interesting position. Uh, Pro bono is great for many, many things: building websites, strategic planning, reviewing HR policies. But to be candid, it's not necessarily classified as a disaster response mechanism. Nonprofits needed immediate funds, safety supplies, and boots on the ground. So instead of attempting to pull attention away from these nonprofits rushing to meet critical, immediate community needs, we took a step back really to listen and learn from feedback shared by our nonprofit network on where and when they could benefit from support from our community of skilled volunteers. This summer, we conducted a nonprofit survey asking questions on how the pandemic had affected nonprofits' programmatic work, fundraising ability, and staff size. We also dug into where organizations were experiencing needs across areas such as communications, finance, tech, design, business development, strategy, and more. And respondents reflected on what they wish they had had at the outset of the COVID crisis. They shared what they currently needed 45 to 60 days out. And then we asked them to look ahead at what they would need in order to continue meeting community needs over the coming 6 to 12 months. And all of this is to say, at the end of the day, Taproot will never be able to predict what challenge is coming next. But after all of these insights, the listening and learning, something we do know is that pro bono can help your organization to prepare for what's coming next. And That's what really led to the development of our newest nonprofit resource titled Building Resiliency Through Pro Bono. So, the survey data we gathered, insights from our nonprofit community members, really fueled this piece. And in the guide, we dig into these insights from the survey and identify the types of pro bono that can support your nonprofit's efforts to build the strategy, infrastructure, and efficiencies you need to become more sustainable, resilient organizations. We also share stories and tips from nonprofits whose work with skilled volunteers has helped them weather the storms by strengthening their own internal capacity. And you'll actually get to hear from one of these nonprofits, Rebirth Empowerment Education, a little bit later in the event. So stay tuned for that. We're actually going to drop a link to this resource in the chat right now in case you'd like to download the resource yourself. Um, we know from our years of working with nonprofits and social change organizations that nonprofit professionals are resilient, and our communities truly are better, kinder, and stronger as a result. So Taproot is really here to make sure you have the access to the support you need to take on whatever the world throws at us next. So that's kind of what's fueling this event today. So with that in mind, let's dig into some data, some project recommendations, and some pro bono tips so we can make that support happen. So first, before I dive into specific insights from the data, I want to get a little bit of a lay of the land and share some quick demographics about the types of organizations whose insights were included in this survey and therefore included in the creation of the Building Resiliency Through Pro Bono resource. So we had 324 total respondents from 31 states and 11 countries to our 2020 Nonprofit Resiliency Survey. Some of whom may be on the line today. So if you're one of the folks who took the time to participate in this research initiative, we so appreciate the time and attention that you shared with us. So please, if you were one of them, drop a note in the chat. We'd love to tell you thank you during the event. Respondents indicated working at nonprofits in issue areas such as disaster relief, healthcare recovery, hunger, veterans, and more. We did allow respondents to identify more than one response for this question if their services spanned multiple programmatic focus areas, so just keep that in mind. Oh, great, Liza, I see that you responded to the survey. We so appreciate the time you took to do that. And we hope this presentation of the results will be really interesting for you. Same with Jean. Thanks so much. I'm so glad you all were able to attend. And as you're letting us know in the chat, if you participated in the survey, let us know what program focus your organization operates in. And feel free to continue dropping in those introductions, the website links to the organizations you work at, or even LinkedIn info if you're open to connecting with other event attendees. We may be coming together virtually for this Pro Bono Week event, but that doesn't mean we can't make some networking possible. So go ahead, keep using that chat for those purposes. So keeping rolling along here, a few more demographics. Wanted to get into the staff size of the organizations that we had who participated in this survey. So some key things I really wanted to note here. It's pretty obvious. The nonprofits we had respond tended to be smaller in size, small but mighty teams. We had 17% of all respondents indicated that they were completely volunteer run, and 46% of all respondents having just 1 to 5 full-time employees. And in total, 71% of all survey respondents had 10 full-time employees or less. And to dig into that a little further, one thing I do want to take a moment to call out here is an acknowledgement that while all social change organizations have certainly faced challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that due to longstanding societal inequities and injustices, these challenges only been compounded for organizations that are minority-led, who already face additional hurdles and burdens when it comes to things like funding, brand awareness, social capital, and more. So Taproot actually hosted a panel earlier this week during Pro Bono Week called Inequities in the Funding Gap, where we dug into this issue with philanthropic leaders from across the space. So I'm actually going to call on Hannah to see if she can go ahead and throw that recording link in the chat in case people are interested in checking out more on that topic specifically. So we did ask survey respondents to self-identify whether they were a minority-led organization, meaning they had a majority-minority board of directors, executive leadership, and staff. So we found that minority-led organizations were more likely to be operating with smaller staff sizes, with 22% of minority-led organization respondents indicating that they were completely volunteer-run. So this is compared to 17% for all respondents. So that is a fairly significant increase. In particular, within this minority-led organization subset, we found that 79% of Black-led organizations indicated having 10 employees or less. Now, these callouts are not meant to diminish the work of smaller nonprofits. Volunteer-run organizations and those working with small employee teams are forces of nature when it comes to the massive community impact that they create and the rebuilding and recovery efforts that they are leading right now. But I mention these points because nonprofits operating with smaller teams and shoestring budgets can be even more vulnerable to unforeseen societal shifts or changes in funding. So knowing that minority-led nonprofits, and even more specifically Black-led organizations, more frequently fall into this category of small or volunteer-run organizations is significant to know, because it adds yet an additional layer of challenges to the proven systemic inequalities that nonprofit leaders of color already face in non-crisis time, much less in crisis time. So we'll continue to call back to this throughout the event today. And then moving along, another demographics stat that I wanted to share with you was just around the annual budget size of the folks who did respond to our survey. So across the board, again, smaller organizations. So 35% of all respondents were at a budget size of 100,000 or under, and 69% of all of our respondents were 1 million or under. And I do also want to indicate that something we found is that 100% of all of the volunteer-run organization respondents indicated an annual budget size of $250,000 or under. So that's pretty significant when we think about how those volunteer organizations are being affected compared to other larger ones. So with those survey demographics in mind, I want to dive into the needs that were reported in the survey. So this chart reflects 3 periods of time. Nonprofit respondents reflected on what support they had wished they had at the outset of COVID. They also shared where they needed support now that we were around 45 to 60 days into the pandemic. Take in mind, this survey was taken back in early summer. And then they considered what resources they would need to continue meeting community needs over the next 6 to 12 months. So a few interesting trends I wanted to note here is that, unsurprisingly, the need for tech and IT support was high at the outset of COVID, as nonprofits scrambled in order to take their work or programs virtual. This need dropped over time as organizations found solutions for some of these tech challenges. Another trend of note, marketing and communications remain the highest need area across every single time period. So specific marketing categories such as social media, graphic design, and web design also remained in demand. So with multiple crises affecting our country at the moment, it isn't shocking that brand awareness and communications has been a challenge area for social change orgs. So really it's this question of how can they break through this noise? And then final trend here, leadership coaching and evaluation saw significant climbs in nonprofit need from the outset of the pandemic to estimated needs for the next 6 to 12 months. So nonprofits saw the need to invest in their leadership, invest in their ability to lead through change, and invest in their ability to track the impact of their programmatic work. However, it's difficult to make that investment in the midst of disaster response. So with these insights from the nonprofit survey respondents in hand, in addition to the pro bono activity of Taproot's community members, we created a list of project recommendations that you'll find in that nonprofit resource, Building Resiliency Through Pro Bono that we think get to the heart of these preparedness and long-term sustainability needs. And that's what I'm going to jump into right now. So in the survey, we found that 63% of respondents reported decreases in funding due to COVID. So meaning that in a time of increased community need, social change organizations that are leading rebuilding and recovery efforts are doing so with shrinking budgets. And in addition to that, we dug into specific shifts in funding that organizations were facing, from Gen Ops to individual giving. Here you'll find a comparison of all respondent data to volunteer-run nonprofits, highlighting that while all social change organizations are certainly being impacted by COVID, the impact is not felt the same way across the board. So you can see that while negative side effects from the pandemic really are hitting everyone, it's these organizations that are volunteer run, are smaller, are particularly vulnerable to financial hardship in the months ahead. And we know from our demographic data that 22% of the minority-led respondents to our survey are completely volunteer run. So this is a group in particular that is specifically feeling these strains. So with that in mind, our first resiliency project recommendation is the development or refinement of your nonprofit's pitch deck. So a great pitch deck defines your nonprofit's identity, clearly conveys your mission and impact, and hones in on specific ways supporters can assist your work. Maintaining pitch materials is an ongoing effort for nonprofit fundraisers. But it becomes even more important in times of crises when individual giving decreases or fundraising events are canceled, like we've been seeing during COVID. So, working with a skilled volunteer who has experience in business development and marketing to construct a deck for the first time, or link up with one experienced in marketing and design to tighten up messaging and imagery in existing fundraising materials. So our pro bono pro tip here is that if you're wondering if your materials could use a revamp, but you're weighing whether or not it's worth a time investment, we'd recommend linking up with a marketing volunteer for a quick consultation session to get an expert neutral opinion to assess if your current pitch materials are up to snuff and or could use that time and attention for a revamp. And so along with each project recommendation you'll see today, we'll share a pro tip from the Taproot team. You'll also see an estimate of the number of volunteer hours that each project will take and a list of related pro bono projects that you could tackle next. I also want to note here this quote from one of the nonprofits featured in the Building Resiliency Through Pro Bono resource, Hand in Hand Parenting. Thelma's organization has been able to bring in over 100,000 in-kind services this year. And we learned earlier that volunteer-run organizations more likely than not have a total annual budget of around 100,000. So we also saw on the last slide that volunteer runs are more likely to be negatively impacted by decreases in individual giving and canceled fundraising events. So with all of that in mind, by making strategic use of pro bono support, your team could effectively double your budget for the year to devote even more of that precious cash revenue to your community service and to investing in more full-time or part-time staff members. So moving right along, another stat from the survey, 56% of nonprofits are experiencing a decrease in hands-on volunteer support. So this is a major shift in operations, programmatic work, and back office support for many nonprofits, which means that strategizing for the months and year ahead is going to be vital when it comes to withstanding current storms and anything that's thrown at us next. So with that in mind, it leads us to our next resiliency-centric project recommendation, which is connecting with skilled volunteers in order to conduct a SWOT analysis. So a comprehensive SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, is a core building block for effective strategic planning. So you can work with a skilled volunteer to research things like industry trends. You can also use feedback from your stakeholders to build a breakdown of your nonprofit's internal strengths and weaknesses and external opportunities and threats. So with resiliency in mind, ask your volunteers to examine how natural disasters, health crises, political upheaval, etc., could impact your programs, funding ability, or reliance on in-person volunteers, especially relevant for this time that we're in now. So our tip from the Taproot team here is to involve your board in this work. Get their perspective on your organization's strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats to give your volunteer a really strong starting point to work from, and build feedback loops into the project in order to keep board members engaged throughout. And I really love the advice from Joseph of Post Colonial Networks, another one of the featured organizations in this resource, because it speaks to investing in your volunteer while engaging staff and board members. So, especially for projects involving strategy, you'll want to make sure that you have buy in from leaders. Allowing opportunity for the volunteer to get to know your work and mission, and other side of the same coin, allowing team members to have a window into the work that the volunteer is completing for your organization will only increase excitement on both sides of the equation and the quality of the final deliverable. And trust me, it's going to make implementation of the project outcome flow much more easily if you do have the buy-in from your team members and leadership. So I'm just going to keep rolling through these. Please continue to drop any questions or comments in the chat as we're going. Next stats I wanted to point out here are around the marketing and communications challenges we noted. So we know from before that 66% of respondents to our survey reported a need for marketing and communications support in the next 6 to 12 months. This was the highest indicated need for our survey respondents. So we dug a little further into which specific aspects of marketing and communications they were experiencing issues or challenges in, and found that 36% of respondents reported brand awareness issues due to COVID, with another 36% indicating stakeholder communications challenges due to COVID. So our proposal with these challenges in mind is investing in communications plan. So communicating clearly, concisely, and consistently is really key for keeping stakeholders and staff members engaged. And it's even more vital in times of flux. So working with a skilled communications professional to create a checklist to guide your organization through the who, what, when, and how of sharing program updates, internal shifts, or responses to current events can be really, really key to have in place, have in your back pocket, ready to use during crisis time. So this checklist should pull in all of the various channels you use to reach staff members, users of your programs, clients that you work with, volunteers, or funders, so that you have a standardized plan for outreach regardless of whatever event arises. So our pro tip here from the Taproot team is to take stock of your existing email, PR, or social media tactics that have worked well for your organization in the past, and really incorporate those techniques into your standard communications plan or checklist. And a consultation session with a communications professional can really help refine that list so that your team has a starting point to run this project from. And then I also want to call attention to the bonus tip offered here by one of the nonprofits featured in the resource, Brada Productions. As we mentioned early on in the presentation, pro bono may be free, but you'll get a lot more out of it if you put more into it. So be prepared to invest time, planning, and management to make sure that you and your volunteer partner walk away from the project with a great result. Another stat that I really wanted to take the time to note here is that in the 2020 Nonprofit Resiliency Survey, we found that 26% of our respondents reported a decrease in staff size due to COVID-19, meaning that these already small and scrappy teams are making do with even less bandwidth. So I do want to take a moment to note here that in addition, 22% of respondents also reported in addition to these layoffs, they also reported a decrease in employee hours across the board. 75% reported a transition to remote work. And then 30% of our minority-led organization respondents reported a decrease in staff. So an increase from our all respondent staff. We saw 4% more on the minority-led organizations front, really feeling the strain from this. And so on that note, our next pro bono project recommendation here is around HR assessment. So you can really build resiliency at your organization by assessing where you stand internally and brainstorming how to improve upon weaknesses while leaning into organizational strengths. So by working with a volunteer to investigate which HR policies should be implemented, researching new remote work standards, or conducting an internal engagement survey can all be elements of this assessment work. And if your organization is among the 26% of nonprofits that have had to decrease their staff size due to the pandemic, you can use this assessment to get a better understanding of how to operate with a new scaled back team. Our tip here really revolves around the fact that there's a lot you can do with an HR assessment project. There are so many different facets of work you could really pull in here. And so for this project in particular, it is crucial to be extremely clear with your volunteer and internal team about what is in scope and what is out of scope. So will this project just cover fact finding, or will it involve making recommendations? Be crystal clear about what your desired outcome is. And then, as Ophelia mentions here, another one of our featured resiliency nonprofits, Pro Bono creates an opportunity to fill gaps in experience on your team and for you to have a test run of sorts with having that type of knowledge on staff. So, this can help inform future hiring plans when you're in a more stable position financially, or inform your board recruitment strategy if you're hoping to have a working board. And with that, I want to move really quickly into our very last project recommendation, and then I'm going to have our guest panelists jump on the line. So the last stat I wanted to call out here was that we found that 45% of respondents reported launching new programs or services in light of COVID-19. So despite decreasing budgets and in-person volunteer support, nonprofits are still adapting to find new ways, better ways to serve community members, which is frankly pretty incredible. And so our last resiliency focused project recommendation here is around financial strategy. So teaming up with a skilled finance professional to assess your current financial situation, pricing strategy, and risk factors. This can include conducting a reforecasting exercise if you're among the 63% of nonprofits who've seen a drop in funding due to the pandemic, or if you're among the 45% who just launched a new program due to changing community needs. You can build a focus on long-term sustainability into this work by requesting recommendations for creating a rainy day fund, or maybe just creating financial scenarios for periods of increased community need so you can try and plan for the future. And then you can see here that our Taproot Pro Bono Pro tip is to get organized for a financial assessment and strategy deep dive by connecting with a finance pro for a quick consultation before diving into an in-depth project. This really correlates closely to this tip from one of the nonprofits featured as a case study in building resiliency through pro bono, and just so happens to be our guest panelist for today's event, Terry Altman of Rebirth Empowerment Education. So Terry shared with us that nonprofits need to do their due diligence to make sure that they are prepared for a pro bono project and that they select the right volunteer partner to work with. But instead of reading her words from the slide here, let's have Terry join us herself. Terry, let me know when you're able to pop on the line. And while you get connected to audio, I'll give you a quick introduction. So I'm so happy to be joined by Terry Altman, who's the founder and CEO of Rebirth Education Empowerment, or otherwise known as REE. REE is all about clearing a path to economic stability for young adults in Dallas's underserved communities. As a startup nonprofit, their programs are set to launch in early next year and will provide pre apprenticeship training and placement in union and non union construction jobs, all with the goal of making economic opportunities available to all of their neighbors. Terry has such an interesting pro bono story, first connecting with Taproot volunteers in March of 2020 and completing a handful of really impactful projects since. But before I give it all away, I'm going to let Terry jump in here. Terry, thanks again for joining us. Let me know if you were able to get connected to audio okay.
Hi, Kimberly. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Terry. I can hear you loud and clear. If folks on the line of attendees could go ahead and confirm that they're able to hear Terry, we can get this conversation rolling. All right, I see William chiming in. He can hear. So, Terry, I kind of just want to pass the mic to you and just share a little bit more about your organization and the work you're doing.
Thank you. So Rebirth is a startup organization. I've actually been working on putting the program together for the last 2 years. The model that we're implementing is a national model, so there's various standards that we have to meet in order to launch that program. And initially, when I knew exactly what the training areas would be, I recruited board members that were experts in those areas, right? Because we wanted to make sure that our program design met the standards of the national organization. But what I found was there was a huge gap and a challenge in the other areas that if you have a working board as a startup, you needed to be able to have someone with expertise in, let's say, financials or accounting or, in that area, or even in communications and marketing. And so that really led me to trying to find. I initially started out with using college students, but that wasn't really working for me. And I don't know how I accidentally learned about Taproot Foundation, and after I joined, it was like the perfect match because you're getting volunteers that are experts in the areas where you need that assistance. So that is really how I initially started out with using Taproot volunteers in the first place. And it's really been helpful because it helps my organization build capacity. It fills the gaps of expertise in areas, that we had those gaps and we're having challenges. And as you stated, my first project was financial. We had QuickBooks online for nonprofits, and that was great. And I have experience with using QuickBooks, but it was with a for-profit.
Right.
And as many know, the chart of accounts for a for-profit and nonprofit are different. And I had a great deal of challenge trying to actually get that system set up. And I submitted the request to Taproot for a volunteer, and I had 2 responses. I had an opportunity to interview both volunteers and look at their references, and I chose one that really worked with us really well. You want me to continue or?
Oh, I mean, you've shared already so many great facets. And so I want to go back to one of them around kind of what drove you to use pro bono in the first place. You had mentioned initially you started out linking up with college students, but you really were finding this need to bring people in who were experts in your field and or experts in their field. And I'm curious, you mentioned using QuickBooks support. Are there other examples of where you've really had to target knowledge gaps within your own organization and bring people in those areas to support?
You mean it as in addition to the financial support?
Yeah. Are there any other areas where you've been able to connect with some expert advice?
Absolutely. We have used Microsoft Office, and I looked into another board resource, like trying to set up a board portal which was really expensive for a startup
Mm-hmm.
organization. And by connecting with a Taproot volunteer, they were able to use our resources in Microsoft, such as SharePoint, to set up an intranet. So we now have an intranet to communicate internally with not only our board members, but with our staff, with our volunteers, or anyone, that we grant that access to. And it basically created that board portal we needed to be able to upload the documents for the board to
Wow.
review, to chat and respond and do a lot of things. My last project that I completed was messaging.
Mm-hmm.
So we're because of the pandemic, we've had to make some changes to our training, and we're updating a lot of things, and we're actually fundraising. And so I use the group volunteer to help me develop key messaging for our organization. They also helped us develop some items that we can use to send out through constant contact, posting for Facebook, because right now we're doing our end of year fundraiser.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really do get a lot of benefit out of using the Taproot volunteers, because they have the skill sets that we don't have, and we actually cannot afford to hire professionals in those areas. So those are some other areas in which we've used Taproot.
Great. I mean, you've really been so savvy about strategically choosing the areas of support you bring in. You mentioned marketing and communications projects. The QuickBooks project obviously falls under financial management. You have this board communications platform, which is such a great use of just HR, getting that HR capacity set up before you dive into programs. I'd be curious to hear from your end, which specific project example do you think has really set you up super well for the year ahead? We're in a challenging time right now, but is there one project in particular where you think it's just giving you an extra layer of strength or sustainability for 2021 when you launch your programs?
Absolutely. The financial project that we did when we set up our QuickBooks, it wasn't like just going into QuickBooks and making sure everything worked. They helped us develop a financial model. So if you run a nonprofit, with every grant that you write, or every funder, or every presentation, and even with the board, they want to know what's the budget, what's in the budget. And I had this huge spreadsheet, right? And, because with nonprofits, you also want to be able to include in-kind and just so many different areas.
Sure.
The volunteer that helped us, what he did is he actually reviewed one of our grants and our budget.
Oh, great.
He helped us, yes. He used the information, and he helped us set up the chart of accounts. He helped us set up our financial model that we would use. And we're now able to run a very simple 1 to 2 page report, and not this huge spreadsheet, that really tells the story of where those financials are going, how the money's being used. And we used the information he provided and to write out our financial management policies and procedures.
Wow.
So
Okay.
so we're now able to, be able to have a clear written fiscal policies and procedures that support a strong financial management position that helps our board to be able to do their due diligence and monitor that part of their role. It helps us to present those reports to funders, whether it's why we are asking for money, and then after we receive a donation, how we spent that money. And every grant application a section there where you have to submit your budget, and there's also a section to submit physical reporting, or if you have an audit. And that being a young organization, we don't have an audit. So he was able to create a document that we can submit in place of that.
Great.
And so that helps us with long-term sustainability, helps us to be able to plan in advance for what we need to do in developing our fundraising, grant pipeline, and it helps us to understand how our program cost is broken down in the various areas.
Great. Again, I'll say it. I said it before, I'll say it again. It's just such a smart and savvy use, but also management of pro bono support. So really directing your volunteer to create deliverables for you in these really targeted ways is so smart. I know you and I could probably keep chatting about this forever, but we do have to keep to time. So before I let you go, Terry, I would love to know if you have some closing tips that you would like to share with other nonprofit professionals who are considering using pro bono themselves in order to build capacity. What's a tip you have for them on managing pro bono projects remotely?
Understand the objectives and be able to articulate the desired deliverables. Provide the pro bono volunteer with all the information they need to complete the project. Develop a clear plan in the early stages of the project to identify a timeline for completion, and schedule regular meetings to evaluate progress and address challenges.
Yes, 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 and yes. You gave like 4 different tips there, and all of them are equally as fantastic. That last one around scheduling regular project check-ins, it's definitely one of the best practices that Taproot recommends as well. Even if a week goes by and you don't necessarily have something project related to check in with your volunteer partner, keep that time on the calendar anyway to connect with them on other things, share a mission update, connect with them personally. It's only going to make the deliverable they're able to share with you all the more powerful, all the more related and impactful for your mission. So Terry, thank you so much for sharing about your pro bono experience, sharing those great tips with other nonprofits. I believe Terry's going to be able to hang around for another couple of minutes. So if you do have questions that you want to ask Terry about her nonprofits, about how life has been like as a startup in 2020, or her own tips, please drop them in the chat. And Terry will stick around so she can answer some of those for everyone. And Terry, thank you again for jumping on the event today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, so now that you've heard from a fellow nonprofit on how they've been able to use pro bono support in order to build capacity, and you've seen some examples of how targeted pro bono projects can lead to preparedness and long-term stability, you might be wondering, all right, how do I find someone with the right skills to actually get these projects done for me? And how do I do that for free? And that's really where Taproot can help your organization. So we've made virtual pro bono simple and streamlined through our free online nonprofit volunteer matching platform, Taproot Plus. We designed Taproot Plus to be flexible so that any nonprofit can get skilled volunteers, no matter how big you are, and any business professional can support said nonprofit no matter where they're located. And as I mentioned before, it's completely free to use. So we don't have any eligibility restrictions around staff size or budget size. So immediately right there, it's kind of our way of scaling up access to really important critical support for smaller size organizations. So currently Taproot Plus is open to registered nonprofits, public schools, fiscally sponsored social good organizations across the US, UK, EU, and India, and we have over 75,000 total users. We also just opened up some of our services to small businesses in light of the current crises. So please, I'm not going to go too far into the small business support today because we only have a few minutes left, but drop a note in the chat if you'd like more information on this small business initiative, and we'll follow up with you after the event. So to get started, all you need to do is pull up a browser and head over to taprootplus.org. I think Hannah will go ahead and drop a link in the chat right now if you want to head to Taproot Plus with us. And once you're on Taproot Plus, you can either hit sign up or submit a request to get started. And when creating an account, we'll just need you to tell us a few details about the organization you work for. And since our platform runs via email, you will need to confirm your email. It's a small step, but it's a very important step. Whenever you have a volunteer who applies to work with you on a project, you'll receive an email about it. And so you'll never know if a volunteer has applied to work with you if you don't confirm that email address first. So really important that you do so. So I do want to save some time for Q&A. So I'm just going to zoom through these next couple slides. And if you do have additional questions about Taproot Plus, we'll address it during Q&A, or I'll follow up with you personally after the event today. But I did want to touch on really briefly kind of the two core options for support through Taproot Plus. We have one that's called a consultation session. So in case you're stuck or you're maybe not sure what project or what type of support you might need, you can request a 1-hour session with a subject matter expert to talk through your particular need. So a consultation session is a really great option if you're brainstorming campaign strategies or maybe need quick answers on specific questions. You'll let us know what type of consult you're looking for, and you'll just share a brief description of your needs or questions and some times in the coming week that you'll be available to connect with a subject matter expert. So that's the 1-hour quick consultation pro bono option. If you're interested in a longer form, more intensive form of support, then you'll want to select the I want to complete a project option instead. And this is really where the bulk of the pro bono requests come in through Taproot. And so you're going to see a lot of text on this slide. Please do not worry about furiously jotting down notes. We'll be in touch soon with this resource along with some other helpful links. So please do not worry about jotting everything down. So really with a longer term project, these projects can be anywhere from 2 to 10 weeks long, with a volunteer working with you for around 3 to 5 hours a week on a discrete end goal. So when you're requesting a project, you really want to make sure your deliverable is clear and concrete. And that harkens back to something Terry mentioned a few times around you want to be really specific with the scope of what you're asking your volunteer partner to deliver for you. Taproot Plus is not a great place to recruit for a position that's kind of never ending. So if you need someone who's going to handle social media for you from now until forever, Taproot Plus is not going to be the right place for you. However, if you're looking for someone who can create a social media strategy for your annual giving campaign at the end of the year, then Taproot Plus is the right place for your pro bono need. So I did want to mention super quickly, because this will be a really great asset to you. We have launched a new tool to help with the project posting process. We have some pre-scoped projects for a handful of commonly requested nonprofit needs. And that includes some of the projects that are within the Building Resiliency Through Pro Bono guide, like human resources coaching, as well as crisis communications. So I would definitely recommend creating a Taproot Plus account. And if you go to the project request screen, you can really lean on our project scope templates to get started. So I know we have so much more I could talk about with Taproot Plus, but I do want to skip ahead just to address if we've gotten any questions in the chat. And again, you have our email here. So if you're interested in learning more about Taproot Plus and we just weren't able to find time for it today, please reach out to us personally, and we'll make sure you get all the info you need. So I'm just taking a moment to scroll through some of the questions here. All right, so I see a good one around, do we have a fee for service for our nonprofit to keep financial sustainability in addition to grants and fundraising? Is this something that Taproot helps with? So Taproot does not charge a fee for our services. So I think that's just addressing part one of that specific question. However, if you are looking as an organization to implement a fee-for-service program, in addition to applying for grants and bringing in individual fundraising, that's definitely something Taproot volunteers can assist with the business planning and business development behind. So yes, the answer is yes. Business development strategy is definitely something you can request through the platform. If you're exploring what could even be your options when it comes to how you can bring funds in, it may be worth setting up a quick consultation session before diving into a longer term project in that area, just so you can do some more brainstorming with a business development pro before solidifying your scope for what that more in-depth fee-for-service program offering you're going to create is. So just a quick tip there. I definitely would recommend a consultation session on that topic. I see another question around, would a social media campaign be considered marketing? Yes. So on Taproot Plus, we kind of have 4 core buckets of where you can receive support. They're very broad buckets. Every project request is totally customizable, though, as long as it fits within those buckets, because that's where we have the volunteers that can support your organization. So that would be marketing and communications, business development and strategy, technology and IT, and human resources. So if you wanted to request a social media campaign, you would first of all need to be really specific about what do you need as part of that social media campaign. Do you need someone who's going to create graphics for the campaign? Or do you need someone who's going to actually write the copy for the post that you'll be sharing? Or maybe you just want to create a strategy for a campaign next year. So all 3 of those might actually make sense as 3 distinct projects that you post in order to connect with volunteers who are uniquely skilled in each of those areas. So just something to keep in mind. Technically, all 3 of those areas, graphic design, copywriting, and social media strategy, all of them fall under the general umbrella of marketing. But instead of looking for a unicorn of a volunteer who can do all 3 of those things really well, it's a better use of time and our volunteer talent if you create more discrete requests for the specific skill sets you're looking for. So 1 project for graphic design, 1 for copywriting, and then 1 for the strategy behind it. So I can see someone asked about Google AdWords for nonprofits. Where can you access that? So we have a description of a Google AdWords pro bono project in our common projects catalog, and I'll actually include the link to that catalog in the follow-up email I send out later this afternoon. So stay tuned. You'll receive more information on that front. And I see someone who would love to get more information on survey results, love more details so we can reference it in our nonprofit needs assessment lit review. We would be happy to, we'll get in touch with you following the event and talk through what exactly you're interested in digging into. So if you are interested in more information on survey results, just drop a note in the chat and we'll follow up with you one-on-one after this event is over. And I know we're right at time. I see a few more questions coming in. So if you do have to drop, please feel free. I know it's a busy day for folks. I'll stay on and keep answering some of the questions, but just wanted to say a really quick thank you for everyone who was able to join us. And I'm going to keep working through it. I see a question around, are there any plans to update the Powered by Pro Bono book? We love the Powered by Pro Bono book. We do update sections of the book and kind of update them as blogs and resources on our website. But as it stands right now, we do not have any plans or timeline when it comes to republishing the Powered by Pro Bono book. So what I would recommend on that front is stay tuned to our website because we do regularly post excerpts that we have updated tips and recommendations that are adapted from Powered by Pro Bono. All right, I'm just scrolling through. I'm trying to make sure that everybody's question has been answered. Um, okay, and if I didn't get to your question on the line today, I do have a record of this chat. So I will follow up with you following or right later this evening to make sure that you do get all of the answers you need. Oh, I see a question around implementation, if that can be a part of pro bono projects. Hannah already addressed it, which is great. I just want to reiterate, implementation can absolutely be part of a pro bono project that you request. Something that we talked about earlier in the presentation was that HR assessment project. Um, Assessment can be anything from digging into existing policies to making recommendations. So, a good partner, a good complementary project to that assessment project could be linking up with an HR professional who's actually going to take the recommendations, take the research that the assessment project gave your organization, and then take all of that information and actually implement it, create a plan, and then run with it at your organization. And so think of implementation as, are you going to build it into the original project scope? Or is it a big enough piece involving a distinct skill set that you actually want to recruit a separate volunteer to handle and manage the implementation of something at your organization? All right, so I think I got to everything. Like I said, I will make sure to scroll the chat records later today and get back to folks if I did happen to miss anything. Since we are a couple minutes over, I am going to go ahead and just make some closing remarks. I do want to reiterate our thanks to Pro Bono Week 2020 sponsor American Express for their support of this week-long celebration of the impact of pro bono in communities around the globe. I also want to share my heartfelt thanks with Terry for joining us today and putting a name and story of impact behind what pro bono is and what it can be for nonprofit organizations. And then I also just want to say thank you to each and every one of you who joined our event today. We know that this is an incredibly busy and stressful period for many, but I know I speak for the rest of the Taproot team when I share that the work of you all, our nonprofit and volunteer community members, is really what keeps us going. Our organization as a nonprofit ourselves revolves around this idea that creating connections across fields can lead to stronger and kinder communities. But this year, seeing firsthand how many of you have stepped up truly heroically to serve those who are struggling, it really fills us with just so much hope for what we as a society, we as a community can be when we finally emerge from this rebuilding and recovery process. So we're grateful for the opportunity to come together during Pro Bono Week and to reflect on all of the good that has been accomplished by simple but really powerful acts of people working together. And we're looking ahead to rolling our sleeves up and are inspired to take on whatever the world throws at us next. So, as I mentioned, we'll be following up later this afternoon with a recording of this event and other helpful resources. And thank you all for attending and helping Taproot make it matter.